Hello, this is James with Minor Illusion, and today I'll be reviewing for you 13th Age by Pelgrane Press. This is a book that it was an absolute pleasure to read. I come from a D&D 5th edition background, but I have had experience with D&D 3.5, Pathfinder, but no experience with D&D 4th edition. What this has to do with 13th Age is that the lead designer for 3rd edition D&D and the lead designer for 4th edition D&D collaborated together to make this game. So if it feels like D&D, then it should. But this is D&D as I would hope it would be. This is the perfect example of what I want in a fantasy role-playing game. And let me just get into it and tell you all about it. This game as very... on the one hand, it feels very much like D&D. You have your traditional stats, you have your traditional races, classes, everything that you would expect, but it is D&D with a difference. It has some indie elements and some unique parts to the system that feel totally unlike anything else. One of those unique parts are the icons, and those are one of the first things you see in the book. The icons are these massive figures in the setting, and the game comes with a built-in setting. But the setting is not fully fleshed out, and there's a reason for that. The setting is left fleshed out enough that there's something to work with, but not too much, so that the game master can add things in as they see fit. Also, this game is very much designed to be built by the game master and the players while they play. This is not a game where you railroad your characters and say, you go here, you do this, you do that. This is a game where you build the game together and come up with a story that is both interesting for the game master and very interesting for the players. Back to the icons. The icons are these massive NPCs, these huge figures. The designers figured that in just about every fantasy role-playing game there are iconic figures such as the Orc Lord, an Archmage, an Emperor, an Elf Queen, that sort of thing. In this game, they are figures that interact with your characters. Maybe not directly, but they do influence the characters, and throughout the game there are mechanics and spells and various other things that work with the icons. But one of the main things that work with the icons are relationship points. When you're creating your character, you have a certain number of relationship points that you can assign to various icons. Now, why would you do this? In order to, you would add this, so say you wanted an icon relationship with the Elf Queen, a positive icon relationship with the Elf Queen, and a negative icon relationship with the Lich Lord. Then at the beginning of your game session, you as the player would roll 3d6, 2 for the Elf Queen and 1 for the Lich Lord, and if they come up on a 5 or a 6, then something interesting happens. If it comes up on a 6, then something positive happens to you in-game, be it that session or the next session, or however the Game Master wants to work it in. That will be something interesting that happens to you that has to do directly or indirectly with that icon. And it's because you rolled those dice that that even happens. And it just adds a certain element of interesting flexibility to the game system. Now, if it comes up on a 5, then something interesting happens, but it might not be positive. It might be an interesting flaw, or you may cause a worker for one of those icons to be inconvenienced, and that could lead to an entire game session right then and there. Another interesting aspect of the game system is the one unique thing. On your character sheet there is a space where you can add something that is totally unique about your character and that is different from every other character in that world. Whether that be that you have a clockwork heart, or you can float, or you can smell magic, or you are a dragon trapped in human form, that is up to you, the player. Working with the GM, of course, if you come up with something that is totally outside of the scope of the game they're planning to run, that could make things rather difficult for the GM. So once you come up with this one unique thing, not only does that give your character something to work with, but it also gives the GM something to work with, something that they now know is important to you and something you're looking to incorporate into the story. So as a game master, this is gold. This gives you exactly what you need in order to make the story interesting for your players. Another unique feature to this game is what's called backgrounds. Gone is the traditional skill tree. No one has skills in stealth, no one has skills in tracking, no one has skills in swimming or anything like that. You have backgrounds. Backgrounds are interesting character history. Say I wanted to create a sorcerer. My sorcerer would have 8 points of background, and I could spend only 5 points in any one background. So say I wanted to spend 4 points in Pirate King background, a couple of points in various other things such as Arcane Scholar or whatever. If a situation comes up which involves being a pirate king, or knowing about ships, or knowing about treasure, or anything that could conceivably have anything to do with my background, by asking the GM and working with the GM, I can work those background points into my skill check and get a bonus based on the number of background points I spend. It's very interesting, and it gets rid of the whole thing where you have, oh, well, I don't have any ranks in swim, so I obviously can't swim, when your character is a hero and should be roughly competent in just about every aspect of being heroic and being an adventurer. So if it has something to do with one of your backgrounds, go for it. Another indie game element that I've seen mostly in Mouse Guard and a few other games is the idea of failing forward. Instead of saying, oh, you fail when you make a negative skill roll, you fail but you advance the story in some significant way. Say your character is jumping across a chasm. Well, they failed the roll. That means normally that could mean they fall, or it could mean that they manage to get one hand on the opposite ledge, but they lose a magic item in the process, or maybe their dagger falls, or a monster creeps up on them, something like that. It keeps the game moving, because just a failure on its own is boring. It has no purpose. Moving forward, the races and classes of this game are what you'd expect from a D&D type of game. But gone is the restrictions on what kind of race goes with what kind of class. If I'm playing D&D 5th edition and I want to play a drow wizard, then I am going to be hampered from the get-go, because I only get bonuses in dexterity and charisma, not intelligence. This game incorporates a bonus with your race to a particular stat and a bonus with your class to a relevant stat to do with that class. This is absolutely wonderful, because if I want to play a half-orc wizard, well, I have to choose between a stealth bonus or a strength bonus or a constitution bonus based on my race, but I can choose intelligence based on my class, and so I'm not going to be hampered from the get-go. And any weird, wacky, crazy character concept you can come up with is feasible. Of course, there are combinations that are better mechanically, but there's no reason why you can't be unique and different. Each class has something unique about it, something interesting, and let's take the sorcerer, for example. Sorcerers can empower their spells. They can bump their spells up by taking a turn to wait and then deal double damage on the next turn. Sometimes this is useful, sometimes you just need speed and you just want to blast away, but sometimes this can be overpowered and very interesting. The barbarian uses what's known as the escalation die, I'll be getting into that later, to go into a rage and do extra damage. They're all different, they're all unique, but one of the highlights is definitely the fighter. In most games, and I've definitely found that in D&D 5th edition, the fighter is, let's be honest, quite boring. You walk up, you hit something, and then that's your turn done. There are many other things you can do as a fighter, but that is basically what a fighter does when you boil down to it. In 13th Age, the fighter does not just hit things. The fighter hits things, but then has what's known as flexible attacks. You look at the natural roll on the die, what number it comes up with, it, whether it be even or not, and then you decide based on the flexible attacks, a bit like feats that you have, and you can trip someone up, or you can knock someone over, or you can draw an extra weapon, or various other things. These flexible attacks allow you to fight, to hit something, and do something else, which is lacking in most other incarnations of the fighter. It makes your fighter unique, it makes your fighter interesting, and definitely something that new players are going to be interested in playing. Now, moving forward to the escalation die, one of my favourite mechanics for this game, and one I will definitely be stealing for other D&D style games. When combat begins, you have your normal bonuses to attack based on your class, but as you progress, the second round of combat, the GM breaks out a d6 and puts it on 1. Every player adds +1 to their attack for that round. The next round, it goes up to 2, and +2 to their attack, and so on, all the way to +6. This makes combat progress extremely fast. It makes combat flow, and that you don't get that lull round about the middle of combat that I've found. Most monsters don't get to use the escalation die, but some do, and dragons being one of the prime examples. Dragons and some others, their abilities work off the escalation die, and when that does happen, that is quite scary for the players. But one of the other parts of the escalation die that I love is to make combat more interesting. If I have all my bad guys run out right at the beginning, well, they're all visible, but it isn't that interesting. But if I have 4 of them on in front of my players, and then when the escalation die reaches 3, reinforcements arrive, and when the escalation die reaches 6, then the final boss arrives, then the battle feels dynamic, it feels interesting, and the escalation die is also there to help me remember when I wanted to bring those guys in. It's very interesting, and I will certainly be using it in other systems. As far as grids go, or miniatures, the game recommends using miniatures merely to be a visual representation of where your characters are, roughly. There are no grids. There is no, I go 5 inches here, 5 inches there, a couple of squares this direction. Forget squares, forget hexes, none of that is necessary. All you need to know is, are you engaged with your enemy, are you nearby your enemy, or are you far away with your enemy? Abilities, spells, all that cares about is those 3 things. It makes it so much easier to run a combat that way. You don't have to worry about, well, I'm 1 inch away from this guy, or 5 inches away from this guy, well, I can't hit him with my attack. It just makes things flow much, much more simply. As far as the running of the game goes, one of the interesting things I found is that there are no opposed rolls. If I'm rolling against a monster's ability, or I'm rolling against something, I'm not rolling against, the GM is not rolling dice in order to counteract me. I'm making a check, I'm making a skill check versus a set difficulty class. And the difficulty class changes based on what kind of environment I am in. The environments are adventurer, champion, and epic. The DCs for those skill checks go up based on each one, starting at 15 and ending at 35, I believe. The the interesting thing about that is that adventurer tier are environments where adventurers starting out in their career could be expected to do well. Champion tier is where they're going to have trouble, but once they advance a couple of levels, then it will become easier. And epic is supposed to be very, very difficult, no matter whether you're level 10 or not. I should also mention that this game is levels 1 through 10, not 1 through 20. The various tiers are interesting because me as a GM, I can think to myself, okay, well, this part of the dungeon is adventurer tier, but that part, if they go into that section through that door, that could be champion tier. And so everything would be different and everything would be slightly harder, and the players would realize that they'd walked into something different, something dangerous. It just adds to the whole flavor of the game. One of the biggest sections of this book, apart from the classes section, is the monster section. It is filled with monsters, over 100, I believe. And this is one of my favourite sections of the book because of the mooks rule. Mooks are these tiny monsters, like goblins or zombies or whatever, that you figure out how many of them you want. Say I wanted 10 zombies. Then I would combine all of their HP together into one, basically it would look like one monster. Once it's become one monster, then I can now control 8 or 10 zombies on the field and not have to track each one of their individual HP. Not only that, it runs faster because once the player attacks one of the zombies, and if it does enough damage to kill 2 zombies, then the player kills 2 zombies, and they have to narrate how they went about doing that. Even if they caught one zombie on their own and the other zombies are, far away, then they have to come up with how they killed that extra one, and that adds a little bit of role playing into combat, not just rolling the dice. The monsters deal a set amount of damage, and so you roll to attack, and if you hit, then that's how much damage they do. On the surface, and when I tried using this rule in D&D 5th edition, it kind of seemed a bit boring. But now that I've been GMing for longer, I realise that anything that saves time for the GM and allows you to make combat flow better is worth it, and set damage is definitely worth it because you know what damage your monsters are going to do. You don't have to roll the dice, you don't have to add up. I mean, in the heat of combat, you're adding multiple dice from multiple monsters, remembering what attacks you did. It's very confusing, rather than just worrying about one individual character as a player. Anything that takes a bit of the burden off the GM is worth the time. I've also mentioned the monsters that use the escalation die. Scary and fun. I'm very much looking forward to throwing some of those at my players. One of the other sections in the book that I really loved was the magic items section. This section is very fun. The magic items in the book are very loosely described. They are definitely there for you to fill in and make interesting. But one of the wonderful things about it is the quirks. Quirks are these little things that the magic items influence your character in. So let's say you had a cloak that made you invisible. Well, the cloak would subtly influence you and make you want to hide from people, whether you needed to or not. Now, if you have just one magic item and you're level 1, then that's fine. But if you had 2 magic items at level 1, then one of the magic item's quirks is going to be actively influencing you, and you get to add that in as a player to your role-playing. It is just a wonderful idea. The core rulebook features a built-in adventure for first and second level characters. It's very loosely defined, which is fun. and you can, based on the icons that are important to your player, then you can change the story and some of the characters change. There's interesting combat. It's very good at walking you through what an adventure in 13th Age should look like. This core rulebook is very much what I'm looking for in an RPG, and I really look forward and hope to review more books from Pelgrane Press. They've given me one other book, it's called High Magic and Low Cunning. This is a very interesting book. It's a collection of scenarios. Not necessarily adventures in the full adventure path sort of sense, like from Pathfinder, but little scenarios that you can insert into an active campaign that have to do with individual icons. And I'll be doing a full review of that and a review of playtesting 13th Age in the near future. So this is James with Minor Illusion, and I am looking forward to sending out more reviews for you in the near future.